WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 142, all about the Silmarillion, Chapter 2, of Aule and Yavanna, being the 142nd part of That's What I'm Talking About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. I've been experiencing the world of J.R.R. Tolkien for the first time, and right now I am reading the Silmarillion, so you don't have to. Today I am joined by Alan of the Prancing Pony podcast. Welcome!
Hi, thank you for having me, Mary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, you can stop messaging me. I've been, in contact with Alan and Sean for several months now, trying to get y'all to come on, and schedules are, always difficult to coordinate, and, on your end and my end.
Mostly on ours, I'll confess. It's been tough.
No, because it's also my end where I'm like, well, I don't really know what I'll be doing in a month from now, so I don't know what to tell you for what you could come on for. So, but we worked it out where Alan is on for this episode, and in the future, Sean will join at a later date. So y'all can stop messaging me. I got them. Don't worry. I heard you loud and clear.
I should have a disclaimer, though. I haven't done a show without Sean, maybe ever. So
Wow.
I don't know, the quality
look at you.
May suffer.
Well, you're doing great
best.
So far.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Did you actually say, though, by the way, that you're reading the Silmarillion so your listeners don't have to?
Yep.
Oh, no. What are you doing?
So a lot of my listeners are the more casual fans, or the fans who there are a few people who are experiencing it along with me.
That's great.
And so there are a lot of people who are just intimidated by the Silmarillion.
Understandable.
And also a lot of people who are just like, I'd like to know what's happening, but I also don't really want to hurt my brain while trying to figure it out.
We want a Cliff's Notes version, huh?
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
So, which, I mean, you could say I've been the Cliff Notes version of Lord of the Rings,
fun.
all along.
All right.
So
we're sort of the expanded edition, if you've ever listened to our show. We take a lot longer than Tolkien does to go through things. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly it. I know that there are lots of podcasts out there that go into a lot of detail, and some people who are maybe at the more entry level for Tolkien or Lord of the Rings are like, I don't know. I don't need to know all that. I don't even know what y'all are talking about. And so
that's fair.
That's why sometimes it's nice to just, dive in at, surface level and experience it and break it down and,
Absolutely.
take it step by step, which is what we're here to do today.
Excellent.
So before we dive into the chapter, why don't you tell me and the listeners a little bit about your history with Tolkien and Lord of the Rings? How did you get introduced to it and whatnot?
Well, goodness, my first encounter with anything from J.R.R. Tolkien was the 1978 Rankin and Bass animated Hobbit. It was a TV special.
Yes.
I was a very young child, sadly not as young as I'd like to think I was. I think, 9 or 10. And so I ended up getting a copy of the book that came out in conjunction with that film. So it was an illustrated edition with images from the animated special. So I very early on had sort of distorted images of the hobbits and of other characters. But that was my first exposure. But what was funny, at the end of most books, it'll say something like, also by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. This didn't. I don't know why. And so I never knew anything about him. I didn't know that he'd written anything else. So I just went on liking The Hobbit, and I didn't talk to anybody or anything. I didn't, never came up. But I eventually discovered The Lord of the Rings in high school. And I read The Lord of the Rings, I think, first as a freshman, probably around 14 years old. I don't think I tried the Silmarillion until I was in college. I bounced off of it probably 3 or 4 times, just like I'm sure many of your listeners have. We hear that all the time from people. I think I finally successfully got through it maybe in my early 20s or so. But it never stayed on my heavy rotation list. Lord of the Rings, though, did. I think I tended to read The Lord of the Rings just about once a year until around the time the movies came out. And I was excited for the Jackson films, really enjoyed them, just kind of devoured them, and became more of a movie fan for a number of years. I regret, let me take that back. I don't regret liking the movies and watching the movies a lot. I only regret not reading the books a little bit more. because I think for me, a few things kind of changed in my mind about what happened in the story, and I had to go back to the book to correct myself. But I would say probably about 8 or 9 years ago when the Hobbit films came out, and I realized the last thing I wanted to do is dig deep into those films,
Yeah.
was to get back into the books.
That's fair.
Yeah. That reminded me books are always better. Didn't take very long to figure that one out. So I got back into the books and was reminded of how amazing they are and have never left. And a couple years later, that's when Sean and I started the Prancing Pony podcast back in 2016, which I can't believe we've been going for 6 years, but it's been fantastic. We love it.
That's really awesome. Yeah. That's so cool that there was a like illustrated edition of The Hobbit that used the animated film, because I did cover the animated films.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And and what I loved about the Hobbit is that it very much gave like, storybook vibes, of like enjoying this tale, this, fairy tale with your kids and your family and telling this story at bedtime. And the animation was, it was definitely unique, but like I thought it was really beautifully done for the time, of course. So that's really cool that there was a version that incorporated those illustrations.
Indeed, I still have it, actually. It's not, the binding is kind of falling apart, so I don't look at it very often anymore.
Yeah.
But that's my very first Tolkien book. Got it back in 1978, so do the math. Yeah.
Well, that's really special. And now I'm going to like go scour thrift stores or something.
Yeah, if you don't need a first edition, it's actually pretty affordable when you can find one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. Today we are going to jump into chapter 2 of Aule and Yavanna.
Wow.
How do you say?
Yeah. Aule and Yavanna. Anytime you have the two consonants like that, the two ends back to back, and the same thing with I'm trying to think of other examples off the top of my head, and I can't, of course. But whenever you have those two consonants, it's a longer. So it's Yavanna.
Okay. I just asked because I find myself flipping back and forth. I say like Yavanna, which just is like I
so
hear myself
American.
say it and I'm
That's
like
such an American pronunciation,
right?
there,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. And also I think that's also some of my like southern dialect coming in.
Yavanna.
So
I like that.
But Yavanna.
Aule and Yavanna.
Yeah.
No, it is Aule.
Oh, you should have. I had a voice recording going while I was reading the first section of the Silmarillion, and I was like reading it out loud, and like my pronunciations were just all over the place. And
that's okay. So is the official audiobook.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
No, I
and
teased,
audiobooks confuse me even more sometimes.
Well, Martin Shaw has a fantastic voice, but he mispronounces Iluvatar's name and a couple of others. I can't recall off the top of my head which ones. I think he mispronounces the AE in like Maithras. He pronounces it Maithras. The AE is pronounced I, so Maithras. For that name or for anything else that's going to have that IE in it. And Iluvatar, it's Iluvatar, not Iluvatar, as he pronounced it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
what is it? What do they say? Emphasis on the wrong syllables.
On the wrong syllable.
Yeah.
Correct. But I'll tell you what, we complete owning this right here. We botched so many pronunciations early on.
I think it's just a rite of passage,
It is. And even though there are guides, even though if you really pay attention to the pronunciation, the guide and pronunciation in The Lord of the Rings, you figure it out, we still messed it up. There's a place called Belagost that we kept calling Belagost. And we kept pronouncing that O as a long O. So it was like Ost in Ethel instead of Ost in Ethel or places like that. But yeah. Belagost. It's not. We're not looking for Shaggy and Scooby Doo in there. It's Belagost. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So this is of Aule and Yavanna, and this is also I was so stunned. I was like blessedly surprised. This is a very brief chapter. It's only 4 pages.
Yeah.
But it was very delightful. This is the first time reading the Silmarillion where I've been like, wait, this is actually really cool stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's the origin story of dwarves. It's a great, almost human story with Aule and Yavanna. Yeah, sure, they're Valar, but boy, their decisions here. You can really feel the sort of human element in the story. It's great.
Yeah. And also I feel like I didn't have to stretch my brain muscle too much.
That's true. There's not as much metaphysics here as there is in, let's say, Ainulindale and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's only, three or four characters too to deal with. So
Yeah.
So I think I'm getting. A lot of people have said, oh, the beginning of the Silmarillion is really rough. So
It is.
maybe this is a glimpse into what people are thinking about when they say, oh, I love the Silmarillion. So
I hope so. I think you'll like it. Yeah.
okay, cool. We open up and it says, just straight off the bat, I love it. It is told that in their beginning, the dwarves were made by Aule in the darkness of Middle Earth. And I was like, oh, so Aule made that's really
There you
cool.
go. Who expected that, right?
There you go. That's really cool. And then I also, on a previous episode, a guest kind of hinted at Aule doing something that everyone else was like, what'd you do, man?
Yeah.
What? This was not
And he
part
knew
of the
it too,
plan.
right? He knew it. I mean, he's afraid of their opinions. He thinks rightly that they would give him grief, so he does it in secret. And we all know from maybe the earlier stuff that we've read in the Silmarillion that doing things in secret does not always result in good things. You do that. There was a line in, I think it's in Ainulindale, where Melkor, they're talking about Melkor, and it's something about out of his shame came this secret anger, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't remember which, but the whole idea was, he was really angry, but he hid it. And hiding things is typically bad, as you'll find out, as you read more of the Silmarillion. I won't say more.
And it explains that he did this because he was unwilling to await the fulfillment of the designs of Iluvatar.
Right.
So he was just so stoked about this plan and the children of Iluvatar and what was to come for Arda, that he was like, well, let's get started now.
Yeah.
I can do this. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And not only that, he wanted people to teach. He loves to teach. He loves to, teach lore. He loves to teach his crafts. He's a smith, and he wants to have students. And you can't have students if you don't have living beings. It's kind of hard to load up the classroom.
He was like, okay, I'm standing around here. We've made this place. It's looking pretty good. I need my next project to work on.
Yeah.
What can I do? Yeah.
Yeah. He does not just sit around and watch Netflix, Aule. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a busybody. He's got to keep doing something.
Got to be keeping his hands busy, no doubt about it.
And this is where, so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but previously it's referenced that Aule is the most like Melkor.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen, a few, instances of that, but this is where I really saw it of oh, I see. Because Aule is now doing something of his own volition.
Yes.
That is not, according to what Iluvatar has told them to do.
Yeah, it's not part of the original music, right?
Yeah, he is breaking away from that mold and he's doing things of his own and making things of his own. The difference between Aule and Melkor is that Aule's intentions are a lot more wholesome, we discussed. He was just so excited to see the future and see Arda flourish, and he wanted people to teach his craft to. So his intentions were good, and that is where Melkor and Aule differ.
Yeah, Melkor wanted subjects, not students.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another great thing to point out, too. It also mentions that he wished, because he knew that they would be here, that they would have to contend with Melkor possibly.
Yeah.
That he made them to be strong and unyielding.
Yeah. Definitely dwarves right there. That describes them in a heartbeat, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes. And he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves in a hall under the mountains in Middle Earth. And that's, exactly, like we know the dwarves in The Hobbit to be.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, note that, we know at this point that the Valar are all based in Aman. They're based in Valinor. He didn't do this in his workshop next to his house in Aman. He went all the way to Middle Earth, to another continent, to do this secret work. And I think that speaks again to his knowledge that what he was doing was probably not okay.
Exactly.
But it definitely connects, of course, with the dwarves' belief about their own origins as well. So,
But of course, God
can't hide anything from Iluvatar. Yeah,
is gonna find out, and he comes down and he says, "Why hast thou done this?"
Yeah. What are you thinking?
What have you done. Just kind of a,
Yeah.
and there is a little back and forth of like, do you realize what you've just done? And Aule is like, yeah, I think I realized what I just did. That was my bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah. You can imagine if he had a middle name, he heard it right there.
Yes.
Let's see. I know he was known as Mehal, which I think just means craftsman, but Aule Mehal, get over here right now. I mean, this is a chiding. This is but Iluvatar, not surprisingly, because he dealt with Melkor the same way, was not. We don't read that he was angry. We don't read that he was, wrathful and speaking harshly. He just asks him legitimate questions. Why did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do this thing that is outside of your scope, right? Outside of not only your ability, but your authority, the right to do this thing. And then he reminds him why it's beyond his power, right? I created you. I gave you your own being, your own independence, right? We go back to Ainulindale, where we read about the secret fire, right? The flame imperishable. It's the heart of all things. That's that kind of a shorthand for independence or sentience or being a being as opposed to, an automaton, which these would have been otherwise. And he tries to explain to him, this can't work, right? And if we let this stand, they're just going to be puppets. Is that what you wanted? Son? Is that what you wanted? And I think that's really when you see the big difference between Melkor and Aule. It's not just in the motivations. That's a big difference. But the biggest difference is in their response to being called on the carpet. Aule, I think the key word to describe Aule here is humble. His humility, his contrition, his repentance, and his remorse are all absolutely what we needed to see from Melkor and didn't. And this is sort of the recipe for how Melkor should have done it. Melkor as he should have been is Aule in this regard. He's doing the right thing when confronted for having done the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But I'm getting ahead of myself, which is what I do. So sorry. We'll get more to that in a minute.
And of course, as someone who is coming from a Christian background, this is also just super,
oh yeah.
We've already seen a lot of similarities between the Silmarillion and the Bible.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
A lot of people even told me, like, it's like reading the Bible, and it very much so is.
Quite literally, not just the story, but the language. Yeah, it's very, exalted language.
Yes.
Even Iluvatar, my thinking, I translate this immediately. What are you thinking about? What did you do this for? But, it's why hast thou done this? It's very archaic language, and Tolkien uses that. Well, you know this because you've read The Lord of the Rings and you've read The Hobbit. He uses language so carefully. This isn't an accident, right? This is intentional. This is designed to create a sense of ancientry, of mythicness. This is above kind of the epic level, right? The Lord of the Rings is more of an epic, whereas The Hobbit is just like a real simple adventure, almost a fairy tale kid story. But then you get into the Silmarillion, and it's even a level higher than that, and it's this more of a mythic tale rather than an epic tale, at least at the beginning. You get into more epics when you get to like Beren and Luthien and Turin but I'll let you get there on your own.
Yeah. But yeah, this story is just so reminiscent of a lot of times in the Bible where people have done something against God's will and they try to hide it or something, and God comes down and confronts them about it.
King David comes to mind. That's the first character. We didn't talk about that on the show because we couldn't avoid all comparisons to religious stuff, but we don't go into that because we're not both from that worldview. So we sort of keep it very neutral. But the first thing I'm thinking of is David, who, when he's finally called down on the carpet, he recognizes it and he pays a price, but he gets it right.
Yeah. And I was just thinking of just like the first story of the Bible of Adam and Eve with the apple of, they eat the apple. They know that they were not supposed to.
What are you thinking, Adam? What did you do that for?
Yeah.
But of course,
and he
didn't
immediately
do what
comes
Aule did.
down.
Adam points to Eve and says it was her fault.
Yes,
I can't imagine Yavanna being very pleased with that if Aule went that route here. I made these dwarves because Yavanna wanted some company.
Yeah, no. That wouldn't have flown.
Doesn't fly.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's a lot of parallels there, no doubt about it.
Yeah. And much like in a lot of the stories of the Bible, if listeners are at all familiar, Iluvatar shows compassion for Aule. And rather than punishing him, he does say, like, Do you not realize what you've done? You've created these people out of your own being. That means you are going to have to control them. And if you are not paying attention to them at all times, they'll just sit there and do nothing. Like, that's not a life for these things to have. And Aule is like, okay, I get it. I'll destroy it. I see what I've done.
He repents. He says,
I'll
okay,
destroy
I'm going to
it.
destroy this work, because you're right. It was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. And as he raises his hammer to destroy them, Iluvatar sees them flinch. And Iluvatar, and also just kind of the action of Aule being willing to destroy it, says, okay, we don't have to do that. That's fine. Thank you for you learned your lesson.
Yeah.
Now let's fix this.
That particular part actually brings Abraham and Isaac to mind. I mean, it's very much, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice. I'm going to go ahead and do what you told me. You told me to destroy him. You told me to kill him. I'm going to do it. And then he stops him and says, no, you don't have to. You've shown that you would. And that's all I needed to know. And here we see the same thing. Iluvatar chides him. And I do have to say, I don't want to skip much or I don't want to go backwards over much, I should say, because I know we have a time limit to some extent, but I love the rationale that Aule gives. And that's really important, because I don't know how much of Tolkien's non-Middle-earth stuff you've read. Have you ever read his essay on fairy stories?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I'm going to recommend that, but take your time, get around to it when you do. There are some really key concepts that he talks about in there. And one of them is this idea of subcreation. And Tolkien, in a poem called Mythopoeia, he also talks about that as well. You can find both of those in Tree and Leaf, which is its own volume that has both those pieces in it. He talks about this subcreative urge that we all have, specifically that we are made by a creator, and therefore we have the urge to create as well. That's where it comes from, in other words. And here we see that reflected in his story of Aule. So Aule, made by a maker, therefore has the urge to make his as well. And that's what he says, right? The making of things is in my heart from my own making by thee. So he's telling Iluvatar, you made me with this subcreative urge, and so I'm fulfilling it by doing this. And he still goes on to say, look, it was wrong. And that's when we get to the sledgehammer bit. I just keep hearing Peter Gabriel in the background. Sorry, I don't know if your audience gets the 80s music references like ours does, but
there will be people out there, they'll get it.
Anyway, but so I just wanted to point that out, because it's really important conceptually to Tolkien's subcreation, because of course he is himself a subcreator, Tolkien. He created this entire world and populated it with, kind of an analog, if you will, to God in Iluvatar, and then to these angelic beings with the Valar. And he's created this world that isn't an allegory, and he's very clear to make it so. It is not an allegory, but he's always said that it's a world that you can believe in if you also believe this, right? It's consistent with his own worldview. So I think that's a particularly important bit right there. And I didn't want to skip that for your listeners.
No, yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Iluvatar stops Aule from destroying them and says, dost thou not see that these things have now a life of their own and speak with their own voices? Mm-hmm. So he's like, well, now you can't kill them because they're alive.
Well, right, yeah. And I've done that part, by the way, because if they would have just been meat puppets for you, but now they have sentience because I can do that. Reminder, you can't.
Yeah.
And he goes and does that. And we see, as you pointed out earlier, about the compassion that Iluvatar showed. It's in that section that we see that, where he says that Iluvatar had compassion upon Aule because of his humility. And that's why. Yeah. So we see both mercy and grace there, don't we? Right? We see mercy in that he doesn't punish him, and grace in that he allows these beings to now become sentient,
And these are all themes, of course, that are, like a through line of Lord of the Rings as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like the idea of humility and humbleness and mercy are really core elements of Lord of the Rings and what happens with, Frodo and all of these other characters.
You think about Gandalf talking to Frodo about having pity, which is essentially mercy. I mean, it's not quite the same, and we can get into the etymologies, but the idea, of course, of having sorrow and not doing the thing that is deserved, right? Maybe Gollum deserves death, but we're going to show him mercy, we're going to show him pity and not do that. You're right. Mercy and grace are are through lines through the entire Legendarium. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Iluvatar's like, okay, you can keep the puppy, the stray puppy that you found
the dwarf
on the side
puppy
of the road.
with the funny beard. Yeah.
Yeah. You could keep it, but this is still not in my vision.
Right.
The elves, I've already named the elves the firstborn, so
right.
they have
exactly
to be the firstborn.
Call them anything other than the firstborn now, right?
So we're gonna put these guys in a sleep, and we will wake them up when the elves and men have come to Middle Earth, and then they can be a part of this land.
Yeah.
But he says, but when the time comes, I will awaken them,
right.
and they shall be to thee as children. And often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption and the children of my choice.
Yeah.
And so this is, I would say, the, root of a lot of elf-dwarf conflict.
Yes, it is.
As I understand it, there's more that happens between elves and dwarves.
Oh, much more. I don't want to spoil that for you.
But this is like where it begins.
Stabby. I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that.
See, the thing is that I think people have told me multiple times, like, what happened, and I've just forgotten every time. So I'll just discover it again,
Good. It's great to discover it for the first time. I'm always so jealous of people who get to do that because, we've been in it knee deep for years now for the show. And none of this is first time for us. We're diving deep and pulling up all the nuggets and connecting dots and things like that. But there really is something to be said for that first time experience. It's so eye-opening. And, it still leads to the second and the third and the fourth readings because you always get something new out of Tolkien. So this won't be your only read of the Silmarillion, I can tell you that.
I don't know. We'll come back to that.
Okay, call me the optimist.
We'll revisit that. We'll see.
Fair.
Like mentioned, when Aule first made them, he knew that they were going to be living during the time of Melkor.
Right.
And that they would need to have all of these, really strong, hardy traits.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, therefore, they are stone hard, stubborn, fast in friendship and in enmity, and they suffer toil and hunger and hurt of body more heartily than all other speaking peoples.
That's right.
And
they've got an 18 constitution. I mean, every last one of them has maxed out their constitution. They are. That is a brilliant description of the dwarves. Not only are they stubborn and resilient and suffer hardship, they are fast to be friends, but they're also fast to want to kill you. They are very quick-tempered in both directions, and we see that again throughout the Legendarium. But they don't get changed. We get this wonderful description of how they are, but if we go back to the paragraph before, or two paragraphs before, we see Iluvatar saying, I'm not going to fix them. I'm going to leave them the way you made them. And that suggests that they aren't exactly, elves and men were designed by Iluvatar himself. Mm-hmm. Dwarves were designed by Aule. So there is something lesser to an extent about them. And I don't mean that in any sort of judgmental sense that, a dwarf is a lower creature than an elf. It's not. It's still a living being with the flame imperishable and all of that. But there is something to be said for their form, for the way that they are, and how both strengths and weaknesses, let's be clear, because they were made to be a particular way by Aule at the time that they were created. So,
Yeah, I just love that description because, how do you read that description and not immediately think of Gimli?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Except for the part where he complains about being an endurance runner. In the films, of course, yeah. Very dangerous over short distances. No, actually, you can run pretty darn far, man. You can suffer hunger like anybody, but yeah.
It's been, Gimli's, a couple thousand years later after these original
He's gone
dwarves,
soft,
maybe.
Man. He's gone soft, yeah.
I guess, I don't know, a question for you. So in the last little bit of this section about dwarves, we learned that they will hold up Aule as, they think very highly of Aule. They call him Mahal.
Right.
Then their part shall be to serve Aule and to aid him in the remaking of Arda after the last battle.
Spoiler,
and last
right?
battle is capital L, capital B.
Yeah.
Is this supposedly the battle at the Black Gates where all of humanity is possibly about to end as Frodo is destroying or not destroying the ring?
How detailed an answer do you want? No, I could give you something because you're unlikely to read anything about the last battle because Tolkien never officially published anything on it. So it does not refer to the end of the Third Age. The last battle refers to something called the Dagor Daggorath, which is a battle that Tolkien talked about in some of his drafts or wrote about in some of his outlines. And it's sort of a end of Arda. It's sort of, I mean, again, if you want to draw biblical parallels, it's going to be like Armageddon in the sense that it ends everything and Arda will be destroyed and then remade perfectly. That's not a spoiler because you read it in the Ainulindalë, right? When there's a line at the beginning there, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up if I can find it. Never since have the Ainur made any music like to this music, though it has been said that a greater still shall be made before Ilúvatar by the choirs of the Ainur and the children of Ilúvatar after the end of days. And that's when the themes will be played correctly. They'll take being when they're sung because everybody's going to understand their own role and the roles of everybody else who's singing. And Ilúvatar is going to give to their thoughts the secret fire being well pleased. So that's alluding to the remaking of Arda after the last battle. But that's stuff that Tolkien never wrote. So there's nothing really there. There's no there, if I can put it that way. And that's why I don't feel like I'm giving you any spoilers to say that.
Okay.
But yeah,
for a guy who in his first book had the main character just be knocked out in the middle of a battle and then woke up and it was over.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that he never really got to writing the last battle. Yeah.
Well, we do know a few things that are supposed to happen, but those would be spoilers because they involve characters you haven't yet met in the Silmarillion.
Ooh, okay.
So come back to me when you're done with the Silmarillion and we can talk about the Dagor Daggorath.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to this man.
So much.
Gosh. Every time I think okay, I've done a good job of diving into this world, there's just
you have. Don't get me wrong. You've done a wonderful job. It's just a humongous world. You can't.
Oh my gosh. It's madness.
His son Christopher, put together a 12-volume series called The History of Middle-earth that basically walks through Tolkien's creative process. And you see all the drafts and manuscripts and all this. And so that's where you find a lot of this unpublished material. So you can dive as deep as you want. We could spend 20 years doing this. In fact, Corey Olsen probably will. I don't know if you know the Tolkien professor, but you think we take a long time. I think we took 5 episodes in the Council of Elrond. I think he took an entire year and a half. So,
I think, isn't he? I think he's doing a project where he's dissecting it sentence by sentence.
Just about, yeah. It's an incredibly detailed analysis. I love his work. It's just, I don't want my grandchildren to have to carry on my legacy. So
yeah,
I don't know how he's going to manage it, but he's superhuman too. So there you have it.
Yeah, that's how the dwarves came to be.
That's the origin story of the dwarves. Do you want to touch real quickly on this bit about Durin, though? Because I think that's worth taking a minute or two on.
Sure, go for it.
So this idea, right, we read that the dwarves believe, and I should add also that a lot of this is what the dwarves believe, because you got to remember how the Silmarillion is written. It's the framework or the conceit is that this is a history written down by the elves. And so, written down by a man who is being told it by the elves. That's even more of a conceit. But we read here that it's held among the elves that such and such, but then that is not the dwarves' own belief, for they say that, and then we get a series of those things. We don't know that that's the way it is. We don't know for sure. But of course, we tend to believe that when Tolkien says, it is said that, or those who say this, we tend to take those as the way it is. So we tend to believe that this is the case, but we only know that this is the dwarves' belief. So I say all that as a preface to this. The dwarves believe that those 7 fathers are essentially reincarnated, that after they die, that they do come back in another body and they are reincarnated as that same person. In this case, Durin's the only one who's named. And so the new Durin gets a new name. I mean, he's Durin the 6th or Durin the 7th or Durin the 37th or whatever. And obviously they don't go that far. But the idea is that it is the same Durin. Durin the Deathless is why they call him that. We don't get to meet the other houses of the dwarves, the other 6 fathers of the dwarves and their descendants. There's some things mentioned about them in the histories of Middle-earth, but that's about it. All we know is of Durin's line. So
this might be a bit of a loaded question.
Uh-oh.
Given that for the Amazon Prime series, there's this new character, a dwarven queen.
Yes.
Do we think, I think they've said her name is Odessa, possibly, I think.
I don't remember what
I
it is.
could have totally made that up. I don't know where I would have pulled that out of my brain from.
No, I can't remember her name, but it's not it.
Well, whatever
Princess
her
Disa.
name is.
Disa. D-I-S-A.
That's it. Okay,
Odessa,
I knew there
Disa.
was
I get why you said that. All right.
There we go. Is it that we don't meet or we don't know who these 6 other fathers of the dwarves are?
They are mentioned as different houses. That is to say, entirely different places in Middle-earth. We never meet them. So she would be of the House of Durin. She's
okay. I was like, so is she one of the other 6? But she is of the House of Durin.
She's of the House of Durin, presumably.
Okay, well, I mean, there goes that.
Because we've never met a dwarf who's not of Durin's line. I mean, literally, that's all we get in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. So
okay, well then, never mind.
We don't know who any of the other dwarven fathers are outside of an obscure text in the history of Middle-earth.
Got it. So, then Aule, remember how he hid all of this?
Oh, yes, I do. And so does Yavanna.
So he goes home and talks to his wife, Yavanna, who, reminder for everyone, let me flip back in my notes and double check. Yavanna is, I equated her to like a master gardener type person.
That's a good comparison.
She is of nature, essentially.
Yeah. Not just plants, but also living beings. The deer and the animals and, all of that. Those are all her critters too. So it's critters and plants.
And he's like, hey, so, by the way,
how was your day,
kind
honey?
of made a
dwarves.
new race of people without telling anyone, and Iluvatar found out, and it's fine now, but
I'm grounded, but yeah. Yeah, that would be a conversation I would have loved to have heard. All we get in the text is he opened his mind to Yavanna and told her of all that had come to pass.
Yeah, I would have loved to hear more of that too.
Hear that conversation.
Also, just because that is such a now I'm not one to play into like gender stereotypes of like husband and wife and whatever, but that is such a like modern stereotypical conflict between man and wife that the husband
very much is, isn't it?
It's every episode ever of Home Improvement.
Yeah, it really is.
My gosh.
I could totally hear it now.
Aule is
Tim Taylor.
Tim the Toolman Taylor.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's terrible. I'm never going to get that image out of my head.
You're welcome. There you go.
That's brilliant. I love it.
Oh my gosh.
More power.
Yeah.
Man, that's absolutely true, though.
Oh my gosh. So, and Iluvatar is, what's their neighbor? Wilson, who always hides
just looking over the fence. What do you think you're doing there?
Providing guidance and.
Oh, that's great.
I don't think I've thought about the show Home Improvement in years.
I know, I haven't either. I'm pulling up things from the dusty archives of my mind, trying to remember that show.
That's so funny.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, so they come, they have this conversation about what Aule did.
Oh yes, they do.
Yavanna's not pleased.
No, she's not.
She is like, wow, Eru let you off like real nice. That could have been bad.
Yeah.
She says he is merciful.
Yeah.
Understatement of the year, I think.
I think so. I think she might have delivered it with a little sarcasm. Eru is, or a little bit of something, a little bit of snark.
Yeah. And she says, yet because thou hiddest this thought from me until its achievement, thy children will have little love for the things of my love.
Yeah.
They will love first the things made by their own hands, as doth their father. Yep. They will delve in the earth, and the things that grow and live upon the earth they will not heed. Many a tree shall feel the bite of their iron without pity.
Yeah, boy, that's how much of that is prophetic in the sense that she knows this is going to be the case? How much of it is almost words with power, right? That she's making it that way. That she's saying, okay, I think it's more the previous. I think it's more, I recognize that this is going to be the case because they're going to be like you, stubborn, not really caring about the things I like, I could just see this conversation. You're right. It is a very
Yeah.
stereotypical, without getting into the gender roles. It's very stereotypical. And I can see this conversation going down quite realistically. Yeah, they will love the things made by their own hands, as do you, Aule. You know, Aule's the craftsman. Remember why he wanted to make them? He wanted to make them so he could teach them how to do crafts. He's the ultimate shop teacher. And, you know, he's not particularly interested in home ec or in the gardening program. He's interested in shop, and he wants to teach them how to deal with rocks and metals and things like that.
Yeah. And so Aule says, well, funny you say that. Literally everyone, all of the children of Iluvatar are going to have dominion over the things that you've created.
Yeah.
And this is by Eru's plan. This is his plan, that they will come into this world and they will rule, you know, over and forsake all of the things that you have created. And nonetheless, I mean, like, unsurprisingly, Yavanna's like, well, that sounds terrible. And it sounds like I'm getting the short end of the stick.
Why is that a surprise to me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't read that part of the music.
So she goes to talk to Manwe, and is like, is this true? Is this true that the children, when they come, shall have dominion over all the things of my labor to do as they will therewith?
Yeah.
And Manwe says, yes, it is true. This is the part that I was a little confused about. He says, but why dost thou ask? For thou hast no need of the teaching of Aule.
Of course, you picked the one sentence I couldn't quite figure out there either.
Is he just like, well, why does it matter to you? Because you're not supposed to know this anyway?
I think this is a tough one. This is one that Sean and I kind of wrestle with. Like, what does he mean here? Why dost thou ask? For thou hadst no need of the teaching of Aule? I'm not certain. And I hate saying that, but I'm not 100% certain.
That's okay.
I think it may be more along the lines of, why are you asking me? Why didn't you ask Aule, who knows this? I mean...
Yeah, that could be it too.
Aule told you this and could tell you more about it. You didn't have to come ask me that. But I think, and I think we get a clue to that reason, or that's how I read that question, by the following answer. And it's because Manwe can do something about it, whereas Aule couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, her heart is anxious. She's, you know, very concerned about what might happen. I do like, and I'm just going to go back to it real briefly. A couple of things that Aule said when he was answering her question or responding to her comment about how the dwarves won't like my stuff very much. He points out that the other children are going to come and they're going to need your resources because they're going to eat and they're going to build. It's not that they're going to do this out of cruelty or out of a sense of destruction.
Yeah.
That this is how they're going to create their existence. They're going to build their buildings, so they're going to need your wood. They're going to need to eat, so they're going to need your plants and your animals. And even though these things all have a value and would have value even if there were no elves or men or even dwarves, they are going to end up having dominion. And but hopefully with some respect and with some thanks, right? He does kind of put that in there. And I like that because he's not ignoring her needs completely or her desires to have those things be protected. He's just saying, look, they're important, but they're not as important as the children. And so the children are going to have this authority to use these things. But if they're going to use these things in accordance with Eru's will, they're going to do it with respect and gratitude. And I think that's really important. But yeah, let's go ahead and go on then to the next bit that you were going to bring up.
Yeah, Yavanna reveals that she's very worried about this. She's all of my hard work is going to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. That sounds terrible. Melkor has already destroyed so much. Why should the things that I've created also be, ruined or destroyed?
Yeah, it's a valid question.
Yeah. And so Manwe is like, well, what do you want to do about it?
Right. What would you keep if you got your choice? Right?
Yeah.
What's the most important thing to you?
She says, well, everything is beautiful, of course. But the Kelvar can flee or defend themselves.
Sorry, we drop into song all the time, so I'm thinking, everything is beautiful in its own way. Anyway, please edit that out.
No, I'm gonna leave it in.
Oh, great! Even my singing makes another show wonderful. All right.
Am I correct in assuming that Kelvar is like critters and animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the fauna and the flora, right? So
okay, yeah.
the Kelvar are the fauna and the Olvar.
Yeah, so she says the Kelvar can flee or defend themselves, whereas the Olvar cannot.
Right.
So
Plants.
trees and plants and
shrubs,
whatnot.
flowers, trees. Yeah.
So then she says something that I was like, amazing, awesome, perfect.
It really is perfect, isn't it?
So I see in my thought, would that the trees might speak on behalf of all things that have roots and punish those that wrong them.
You've read The Lord of the Rings. What's she talking about right there?
She's talking about Ents. She's talking about Treebeard.
Don't be so hasty. But you're right.
I love this because the Ents are one of my favorite parts of Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
And so hearing about like their origin story and their creation is so cool and fun. And also that it comes from this person who cares so dearly about her creations being protected.
And I think we get a little glimpse of Tolkien here as well, because, of course, he was very passionate about trees in particular. I mean, he was a guy who loved nature. And, you know, I think a lot of environmentalism can look to Tolkien for support. But I think specifically trees. If you read his letters volume, there are some things he says about trees. There was one that was in a neighbor's yard that got chopped down that he just really lamented. And trees to him are very important. In that same volume, I mentioned Tree and Leaf that has Mythopoeia and On Fairy Stories. There's another little story of his that's an allegory. Yes, he wrote an allegory called Leaf by Niggle, and it's also about a tree. So he loves trees. So it's not a surprise to see Yavanna talking about how important trees are and would that the trees could right these wrongs. I love it. It's great.
Yeah. Manwe's like, okay, let me think about this.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and let me go talk to the man upstairs. Quite literally. Yeah.
He's like, let me go have a chat with God. And so he and Iluvatar kind of work it out, and Iluvatar shows him that in the song, in the music, the idea of Ents was there to begin with. He just maybe hadn't seen it quite yet. So Iluvatar shows him that, yes, this is absolutely in the plan. This can be done. So he comes back and tells Yavanna this. This is also where I get a little bit confused. So he says, yes, absolutely, we can have the Ents, and they will be the protectors of the forest and everything. Then it says, did not thy thought and mine also meet, so that we took wing together like great birds that soar above the clouds? That also shall come to be by the heed of Iluvatar, and before the children awake, there shall go forth with wings like the wind, the eagles of the lords of the west.
Yes.
So are they also creating the eagles?
The sentient eagles, right? The ones that everybody says should have flown the ring to Mount Doom.
Yeah. The giant ones.
The giant ones that
Gandalf
talk.
rides. Yeah.
Thorondor and all of those guys. Yeah. These are them.
Okay, so I didn't totally, read into that or anything.
You were absolutely right. They are
great.
If the Ents are the ones protecting the trees, then in theory the eagles are the ones who perhaps protect some of the animal life. I don't know that they do that quite the way the Ents shepherd the trees. As we know, eagles will dive down and grab a sheep, so the Beornings aren't too big a fan. But they are definitely a higher level of being than just creatures. They have, as the text says here, that the thought of Yavanna will awake, and it will summon spirits from afar, and they will go among the Kelvar. So that's going to be the eagles, and the Olvar, and that's going to be the Ents, and some will dwell therein, and their just anger shall be feared. Yeah.
Amazing.
Isn't
so
it?
Cool.
So we've got the origin story for the dwarves, the Ents, and the eagles all in like a 4-page chapter.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. So cool. And also what I find really cool about what Yavanna has done here is that we have the Ents, who are these, protectors and guardians on land. And then meanwhile, you have the eagles who are up in the skies, in the mountains where the Ents cannot go.
Right.
So we're getting all our, grounds covered, basically.
Yes, we are. And Ulmo's like, what about over here, man? Ulmo's got the sea, and he's like, what do I get? Do I get any like magic fish? Anyway, no, he doesn't.
Maybe later, bro. So she's pleased with this. She feels good about this. So she goes home to Aule. She says, Eru is bountiful. Now let thy children beware, for there shall walk a power in the forest whose wrath they will arouse at their peril.
Mm-hmm.
And Aule is at his like workbench, whatever.
Yep. He's doing
and he
his
stops and kind of maybe looks at her and says, nonetheless, they will have need of wood. And he went on with his smith work.
Yeah. Oh man, I got so many jokes there, but no.
That's pretty cold.
That is pretty cold.
For him to just, like, she was so disheartened to hear that the things that she was creating would be used.
Yeah.
And, ruined or destroyed in some manner. And then she came back and was so excited to share and was like, this is great. Isn't this great? And Aule is just like, well, people are still going to have to cut down your trees.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those moments where I really wish I could see the actual conversation. I mean, is Yavanna coming back on, oh, Arrow is so bountiful. You should really warn your kids because now there's going to be this danger in the forest. Or is she like, Arrow is bountiful, man. I mean, you thought he was great to you. I said he was merciful to you. Arrow is bountiful to me. Let thy children beware, Aule. Yeah, I'm talking to you, I mean, who knows? Was she being snarky or was she being like just revealing her heart? I don't know. But I do think it's interesting that she comes back and he's in his smithy pouring molten metal into a mold. So he's busy working. I think he's just kind of blowing her off. Nonetheless, they'll let me the wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you won't.
And that's where the chapter ends. A very sudden end.
Boom. Cut. Fade to black.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to see the argument that happens after that. That's private.
Yeah.
That's I hope that in his smithy, he's got a nice cozy bed because he's probably spending the night there.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
This is the man cave and he's stuck in the man cave for a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is the end of the chapter.
It is. You're right.
Is there anything that we glossed over or anything that you wanted to go back and point out or
let's see. There might have been a couple of
elaborate
things.
on?
We talked about Manwë and Iluvatar's conversation, right? When Manwë went to Iluvatar to figure out what was going on, and we get some more details about how things take place, right? The vision was renewed. It was not now remote. For Manwë was himself within it. And yet he saw that all was upheld by the hand of Iluvatar, and the hand entered in, and from it came forth many wonders that had until then been hidden from him in the hearts of the Ainur. I think that points to this idea that we will see the intervention of Iluvatar, the hand of Iluvatar, if you will, coming into play in key moments in the stories. I think, for example, we could point to Bilbo's finding of the ring as perhaps a moment where the hand of Iluvatar kind of came in and gave a little nudge. Certainly Gollum falling off the edge of the precipice in Mount Doom, very much a hand of Iluvatar moment.
Interesting to think about.
Where we start to see little nudges, because one of the things that's really hard to wrestle with in all of the Legendarium, but especially in the Silmarillion, is this idea of fate and free will. And we see, for example, that the music is as fate to all else but man, right? Men have the ability to, as the text says, to essentially go beyond the music and change the way things are. Whereas elves and everybody else, the music is as written, and the things that are going to happen in the music are the things that are going to happen. That's a hard thing to get your head around, this idea of fate and free will not being entirely incompatible, because we tend to think of one or the other. Either something is deterministic and is always going to be X, or there's free will involved and it'll just be the results of decisions. And what we see in the Legendarium is really a mix of both. We see, I think of Frodo's decision in the Council of Elrond when he says, okay, I'll do this thing. I'll take it. And I can't remember the exact words, but Elrond says, I believe it was fated for you to do this. But then later on, he commends him for his choice because it's both. And that's something that we see, I think, in that little bit, that description about Manwë in his conversation with Iluvatar. He's seeing the playing out of history, but then he sees these little interventions that come into play. And sometimes he uses people and their decisions, like Bilbo or Frodo. And sometimes he does little things like pushes Gollum off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
However you want to view it.
It's a pretty big thing to do. Pretty big thing, yeah.
It's a pretty big thing. And You'll see some very explicit moments when Iluvatar is directly mentioned as being involved. I can think of really only one more where we're at in the story, and it'll be towards the very, very end. I'll just mention the word Numenor, and it's related to that. But it's really interesting every time we harken back to the music and we go back to how this plan, unfolds over the course of history. So I just kind of wanted to reference that. Is there anything else specifically? I do like how Yavanna thinks, oh, yeah, that's right. We did do that thing in the music. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. The trees are going to be really nice and tall so that the eagles can stay there. And Manway's like, no. Your husband's mountains are the only things that are going to be tall enough. There's a little bit of a humbling there, I think. A little bit of a reminder of her role as well as of Aule's role. And then of Manway's kind of overarching superiority as essentially the king of Ardas, the high Vala. So it was, nay, only the trees of Aule will be tall enough is, I think, a hard thing for her to hear. But she does come home, and you'd think that Aule would be a little smarter than that. He's going to, I would counsel against I would suggest a different reaction there, but he didn't listen to me. They never do.
I'm interested to see. I mean, Aule's already, he's made some interesting choices. So I'm interested.
He has.
He
has.
I look forward to seeing what else do these guys do? Because in my mind, I was thinking, oh yeah, these are the gods of Middle Earth, and they're perfect and whatever and blah, blah, blah. But clearly they're already making their own choices that are questionable.
They are. And they'll continue to make some questionable choices. You're going to get to one fairly soon after the elves show up, and you'll see a split between them in terms of some of them want to do one thing and some of them want to do another. And one could argue that maybe the choice they made might not have been the right one. It's the one they made. And history unfolds because of it. But you'll see what I mean. I don't want to ruin things for you.
No. We'll get to that, everyone, and for the rest of the year, by the way. Well, that will bring us to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed myself. This is so much fun. I love talking about Aule and Yavanna.
And you did great going solo without Sean.
It felt so weird. Sean, I still love you, buddy. Can't wait to record a show again.
You did great.
I'm sure he'll do just as well.
Where can people find you on the internet, and what would you like to share with the audience?
Well, goodness. If you have not listened to the Prancing Pony podcast, please do. I'm not telling you to stop listening to this show. Don't do that. This show's great. But when you are ready to take just a slightly deeper dive, come find us at the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, we've been going for 6 years. We covered the Silmarillion over the first, 48 episodes or something like that. And then we moved on to The Hobbit. And then we're taking the 6 books of The Lord of the Rings. That's right. Each volume has 2 books and doing a season on each. And we are in the middle of season 4. So right now we are with Frodo and Sam. We happen to be in Ithilien. We're about to leave Faramir and head toward Cirith Ungol. Great part of the story. Please join us there or join us wherever you'd like to join us. You can find us at the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod. You can find us on the web at theprancingponypodcast.com. We have a subreddit, also r/Prancing Pony Pod. You can find us on Patreon. We have a really active community there that joins us for live episode recordings once a month. They also get bonus episode, postscripts, things like that. And let's see what else. Rings of Power. We're doing a show on that, a whole separate podcast unrelated to the PPP. It's going to be called the Rings of Power Wrap-Up. And you can find us at Rings Wrap-Up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, subreddits, all of that, just at Rings Wrap-Up. You'll find us. Also, of course, you'll find us in your favorite podcast app under the Prancing Pony Podcast or Rings of Power Wrap-Up. We already do have a few episodes out talking about the trailer, talking about the images that they released, speculating and having all sorts of fun talking about that. So come take a listen. If you didn't like me solo, that's okay. I'm better with Sean. We're a lot of fun.
No, you were great. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're too kind. I'll slip you the 20 later.
Well, that is wonderful. All of that will be linked in the episode description.
Thank you.
So definitely, listeners, if you're someone who is always messaging me about questions for lore and telling me all of this other background information that I haven't even gotten to yet, Prancing Pony might be more up your alley if you want to dive into those details, whereas we'll still be in the, slow lane over here working our way through the Silmarillion.
Still got the water wings on and you're in the shallow end of the pool.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay.
If you want to go
you're in the pool.
jet skiing or something,
there you go. I love
or scuba diving. Go over there. That's the place to do it.
Awesome.
That's What I'm Talking About is a proud member of WBNE. If you want to learn more about the network, go to WBNE.org, where you will find all of our shows, like Curly Critics. The cover art is by Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at Vaishon Designs. You can get merch for That's What I'm Talking About by going to tpublic.com/user/talkingaboutpod. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at TolkienAboutPod. You can follow me on Twitter at MCWhatsup and Instagram at MCTurndownForWhat. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/TolkienAboutPod to explore the different tiers and perks that are available. Next week, I hope to be making an announcement about updating the Patreon, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you can become a sponsor of the podcast, like Taylor. Thank you so much for continuing to support That's What I'm Talking About. I very much appreciate that. I appreciate your contributions to Discord, which, by the way, listeners, if you're not a part of the Discord server, you definitely should be, because then you can talk to wonderful people like Taylor. As always, if you like what you're listening to, please rate and review. I don't think you can review on Spotify, but I know you can definitely rate, so make sure to give it 5 stars. Over on Apple Podcasts, I'll read out a more recent review that someone left, which was very kind of them. Ivya778 says, I adore this podcast. Thank you for creating such a fun space. Easy to follow and also hilarious takes on Tolkien. I'm looking forward to hearing your views on the Silmarillion because I read it once and did not really get it. Same. I am reading it, and a lot of times I'm still not getting it. It's very slow to come together, and we're only on chapter 2, So thank you so much for those kind words. And if you want to be a kind human being too, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts.
Thank you again so much for joining me. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
Keep reading, whatever you're doing. Enjoy Tolkien. It is a massive world, and you'll never be able to reach the end of it. And that's one of the joys about it. So I'll tell you what, the best thing is the community. So find friends online or in person moots, conferences, gatherings, do it. Great people in this community, probably the best fandom. And I've been in a lot of different internet fandoms. So far, this is the best one.
And that's what I'm talking about.